Smells so good. Cinnamony, caramelly, appley. It's the crisp. Sorry. It's been a long day. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I have a recipe that transitions perfectly from late summer into fall using apples, like my favorite baking fruit of all time. And this is the time of year where all the fresh apples are coming in, and I'm so happy that I don't have to eat apples that are a year old that have been sitting in cold storage. So I'm keeping it very, very simple. I'm making a caramel apple crisp. I'm making the whole thing in a skillet, so it's really streamlined and easy and just like one of those perfect kind of warm, comforting desserts. Crisps, I think for me historically have been underappreciated. I ate a lot of crisps when I was a kid, but basically a crisp is like a much easier version of pie. You don't have to make any pastry. You just make a kind of simple oat-based topping. It goes right on top of the fruit and you bake it together, and it's just like this really comforting dessert and super, super easy. It's kind of foolproof and you cannot mess it up too much. So ingredients, very, very straightforward. Aside from the apples, it's all very pantry-based ingredients. So for the filling, I'm starting with 3 pounds of apples. Then I have granulated sugar, 4 tablespoons unsalted butter, 2 tablespoons heavy cream, and some vanilla extract. Then for the crisp topping, old-fashioned rolled oats, more butter, this is 12 tablespoons cut into cubes, all-purpose flour, demerara sugar, and granulated sugar. Then I have, cornstarch, that is for the filling, sorry. Also for the topping, cinnamon, salt, and that's pretty much it. I have a 10-inch skillet that you'll need for cooking the apples, and everything gets assembled and baked in there. So make sure it's oven safe. Don't use like a nonstick. Don't use anything with a plastic handle. And then I just have a couple bowls for making the topping and for, like processing all my apples, and that's it. Before I get into the recipe, I want to thank our friends at Mill for sponsoring this episode. Mill is the maker of this incredible bin that sits discreetly in your kitchen, and it's where you can put all of your food scraps, from the herbs going bad in your fridge to the coffee grounds from your morning coffee, and it turns all that stuff into this nutrient-rich food grounds. I especially love the Mill because we have a garden, we sprinkle it in our raised beds, we also give it to our chickens. They love eating it. It helps us save money on chicken feed too. But if you don't have a garden and chickens like we do, that's okay. Mill has a pickup option where they will take your food grounds and distribute it to local farms so it stays within the food system. Another thing I love about the bin, it's completely odorless. It's so quiet. I think it took about 2 seconds to set up, and I easily control it via an app. So I use the app. I have it run every night automatically if it's full, and I never have to think about it. So to learn more about Mill and the bin, you can check out the link in the description below. And now let's get back into the recipe where I'm gonna make some food scraps and put them in the bin. The one step in this recipe that is even remotely time consuming is getting all your apples cut up. So you gotta peel them and core them and get them all sliced. So I'll show you my preferred method for doing that. So here I have 2 cups, again, old-fashioned rolled oats. Then I have just a half a cup of all-purpose flour. The flour is just there as like a binding agent to kind of hold all the oats together. Then I'm gonna add, I have 1/3 of a cup each of granulated and demerara sugar. So these are gonna go in. The crisp, it's like so non-technical, you kind of can't mess it up. And a great thing to do with kids. I have some salt and some cinnamon. I have cinnamon in the topping, but not in the filling. So I'm just gonna toss this together with my hands. Again, good to do with kids, because like the messier, like the more hands on it, the better. Then I have my 12 tablespoons of unsalted butter, which is cold, and I just cut it into cubes. So this is gonna go in. So I'm just gonna toss everything together and get the butter sort of separated and coated. Also a great way to use up a lot of apples if you go apple picking, because apple picking is really fun, but you can pick like 25 pounds of apples in like 2 minutes, and then you're like, what am I gonna do with this, and how much applesauce can you eat? Anyway, you can see what I'm doing here is I'm just taking my fingertips and smashing the butter in. And this is not like making pie dough where I wanna leave the butter in pieces. I actually wanna work this until the butter is like completely incorporated into the ingredients, and I have this sort of uniform texture. So this mixture is done. You see how I have these big sort of wet crumble pieces? And if you look in the bottom of the bowl, like there's no loose floury parts. Everything is bound together, and neither are there big discrete pieces of butter. It's all been worked together. So this is really the ideal texture for a crisp topping. So I'm gonna stick this in the fridge, and then I'm gonna go on to processing my apples. For the filling, I have 3 pounds of apples. It's actually a little more than 3 pounds, but the apples don't always cooperate in terms of their size and weight. So again, these are Pink Ladies. If you have a preferred baking apple, use that one. You want an apple that holds its shape. That's the most important thing about a baking apple. So I'm gonna start by peeling them. Obviously I'm doing this now, and these apples are gonna sit for a little bit while I make my caramel, but the caramel turns them brown anyway, so I'm not too worried about the apples turning brown. So what I like to do is I do a ring with the peeler at the top, the stem end, and then a ring at the base, and then I like to do like top to bottom peels. And it's just like a wrist rotation. And I find this to be the most efficient way to peel an apple. This one's a little blemished, but it really makes no difference. And then peel. So I'm gonna go ahead and peel them all. And then I'll show you how that kind of coring and slicing I kind of do all in one step, and I'll show you how I do it. So now for the actual coring and slicing. I kind of do it all in one step. But what I like to do, I cut down into the apple around the core, and I kind of separate these lobes. So you can see that I like to cut, like I'm not cutting through the stem. I'm just cutting a little bit off center to the stem. So now I have all the seeds and everything and core in there, and just like pure apple flesh. Then I put it down on the cut side, and I continue cutting around that core to take off the rest of the flesh. And then I have this like straight piece of core. Sometimes I eat around it because there's like still apple flesh there. But in the name of efficiency, I just do it this way. So now I have all my apple pieces, and I'm just going to do these into not particularly thin slices, maybe 1/4 inch slices. So what I'm going to do is just remove all the flesh and separate out the cores. You might have like a little bit of skin still on it, but like this is a relatively rustic dessert, so I'm not too worried about it. So I have my apples all ready to go. I'm going to put them behind me where the skillet is, because these are going to get cooked. And then cores, peel, stems, everything goes into the mill. The first thing I want to do before I start anything with my filling is actually just preheat my oven. So I have a rack in the center position, and I'm just going to get it on 350. Next, I'm going to get a little heat underneath my skillet. I'm going to go on kind of medium-ish, medium-high. And this is a 1/2 cup of granulated sugar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make what's called a dry caramel. So I'm just going to start by sprinkling the sugar evenly across the surface of the skillet. So if you're making this, no matter what kind of cooktop you're using, make sure you're working on any kind of heating element that's like the same size as your skillet. So you don't want to do it on like a little tiny burner. And that's just for even cooking. So I did about half of the sugar, and there's this really neat transformation that happens where it goes from looking dry and granulated to like liquid and clear. So I'm just gonna stand here and wait for the sugar to start to melt. And as it melts, I'm gonna sprinkle on more until I've used the full 1/2 cup. So you can see it's starting to take on some color right there. So I have a decent amount melted. So now I'm gonna start to just kind of stir. And the stirring is to help to equalize the temperature and to encourage everything else to melt. So you have, see, it's basically all melted. Okay, so we're almost at caramel stage. I'm gonna turn the heat down a little bit. But you can see that once everything started to melt all together, it really comes together really quickly. It smells like super toasty. So now I'm gonna kill the heat, and I'm gonna add my butter. And this butter is going to immediately halt the cooking of the sugar so it doesn't get too dark. I was melting the sugar at like medium high, And then I turn it down to medium once I started to see it take on color. And so now I have my butter in there, and you want to stir really well because you want to emulsify that butter into the caramel. And I'm also adding some heavy cream. And then I'm going to add some vanilla extract. So this is the base of my filling, is this caramel mixture. See, it has this really nice color to it. And the apples are what is going to add a lot of liquid. And they're going to give off their juices, and it's going to turn the caramel into this kind of like sauce for the apples. And then everything's going to reduce. So I have it on medium. And I'm going to add several handfuls of apples. And I'm not going to add all of them because it's obviously a lot. But one reason I like to also pre-cook apples is not just because I like the softer texture, but because I can fit more of them. Like they kind of cook down and they lose some of their structure. And I just like being able to really load them up. That's probably about half of the apples. And I want to stir them and get everything well coated. And then as these kind of start to soften and give off their juices, I'm going to add the rest. If you do see the apples themselves starting to take on color, that's actually, I kind of like that. I like the flavor that that's going to add. But if you're like scorching them, turn the temperature down. You don't need to cook them that hot. These will cook down for a few minutes. Once they've started to soften, I'll add the rest. And I just want to cook everything down until it's nice and soft and some of the liquid has reduced. So all the apples are in. And you can see that the first batch is starting to turn that translucent color and it's also like flexible. It's not going to crunch if I fold it in half. And what's also happening is obviously I'm cooking this mixture and there's moisture that's evaporating. So I'm really concentrating the apple juices, which is what I want to do. And you can see that 3 pounds of apples all of a sudden doesn't look like a crazy amount. So while this is sort of continuing to cook and reduce and the apples are releasing their juices, I'm going to make what's called a cornstarch slurry. So a tablespoon of cornstarch. I'm going to add it to the bowl, just a little bit of water. And then just stir with a fork, and you can see it dissolves pretty quickly. So I'm just going to set this aside here. And it will make it so that I have like this nice cohesive filling. But this is looking pretty good. They're all kind of looking a little translucent. You can see they've lost a lot of volume, so everything fits in the skillet really well. So I'm going to leave the heat on because I do want this mixture to reach a boil. I want to activate the cornstarch. So I'm going to pour this over the apples. I'm just swirling it to make sure I don't have any cornstarch that's undissolved at the bottom. So I want to stir that in. Keep it moving. You don't want to have any scorching. And all of a sudden, like all those apple juices have thickened. So I'm going to take it off the heat. And I want to let it cool for a couple minutes. So we'll actually go right back over to the work surface where I'll assemble everything. So here is my caramel filling. A couple bonus ingredients that it's like, oh, should I have added that? It depends on your apples. If you have really nice tart apples, you don't need to add anything. These apples are a little sweet, so I kind of want to add like a tiny shot of apple cider vinegar to just bring out some of the flavor. You could do a little bit of lemon, but again, if your apples are acidic, then you're good. Like if you use Granny Smith, not necessary. And then I also kind of want to add a little pinch of salt, just because I've salt in the topping, but just because I have the caramel in there, it's just going to help bring out the flavor. So just a little sprinkle of salt, half a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. Okay, so you can see I have my filling here. There's not a lot of loose liquid, or there's really not any loose liquid. It's all nicely thickened by the cornstarch. So I'm just going to get these all kind of compacted down into an even layer. And the apples are hot, but it's not like I'm putting pie dough on here or something that is going to require like that you want to stay cold until the last minute. It's okay if the crumble gets a little bit warm. The whole thing is going to warm up anyway. So I'm going to grab that from the fridge, and then my oven is preheated. So I'm just going to top this and it's going to go in the oven and bake. So here is my crumble mixture. And this is also going to cook down. And one thing is it does feel like a lot of topping for the size of the skillet, but use it all. I guarantee you're going to want it on there. All right, so this is assembled, super quick and easy. This is gonna go into my oven, which is preheated. Again, 350, I have that rack in the center. And one of the nice things about a pre-cooked filling like this is I don't really have to worry about like, are the apples done? All I'm really looking for is the surface to be nice and golden brown. And so at 350, that'll take like 40 to 50 minutes. So in this goes. The crisp has been baking for about 45 minutes. So it's done. The topping looks nice and golden brown. The juices are bubbling. So I'm gonna pull it out. So some nice juices happening around the edges. This is right out of the oven. It's super hot. I think a crisp is best served warm, but this is like too warm. So I'm gonna let it cool for a little bit. And then I have some vanilla ice cream, which is like the perfect accompaniment. This is not like an overly sweet recipe at all. So we'll get very sort of fall vibes. We'll get some ice cream, scoop it into some bowls, and we'll give it a taste. Oh, it's hot. It's hot. All right, I'm gonna wait. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. We'll come back. So the crisp is cooled. It's warm, but not like steaming hot. I have some vanilla ice cream. I've just been tempering it on the counter so it's a little bit easier to scoop. What I really like is how the filling gets even more caramelized around the edges. So I definitely want to take like an edge piece. So I love getting like this nice scoop that holds together. And the filling looks juicy, but there's not like pooling liquid. You know, what you don't want is, you don't want the filling to be set to the point where it's like sticky and like goopy. So it's like, they're still juicy and shiny and look great, but all right, so I'm just gonna do a nice scoop. It looks so good. All right, look how good this looks. One of the greatest pleasures you can have is a warm dessert with cold ice cream on it. The like texture contrast is one of my favorite things. So this one is gonna be really good. All right, so I'm just gonna get some of the juicy apple and the topping. This is what I feel like people dream that their favorite apple dessert tastes like this. Crisp, it's crunchy, it's like fully baked, and the apples are silky. That's such an important texture with apples that are baked. Like I want them to be silky and still juicy. They're not mushy. They still have their integrity, but they're like fully cooked and soft. And you get this kind of like subtle cinnamon flavor from the topping and the kind of caramel like background notes. I really can't think of a more perfect fall and winter dessert. It is the definition of comforting with the like warm, crisp, cold ice cream. So good, and the whole thing comes together in one skillet. So I hope you give it a try. I want to thank our friends at Mill for sponsoring this episode. As a baker that makes a lot of fruit desserts, and I always have scraps on hand, it's really become such an important part of everything I do in the kitchen and everything we do here in this house with chickens and gardening and compost. So I want to say thank you, and don't forget to like and subscribe.